Good morning students, today we will discuss Pride and Prejudice published anonymously in 3 volumes in 1813 by Jane Austen. We have already discussed her first published work Sense and Sensibility. This is her second work where the opening lines of the novels are one of the most famous and quoted lines, and that is, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Alright, so without any further ado, let's quickly get into the summary of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So the novel starts with the arrival of a wealthy man, Charles Bingley, to the estate of Netherfield Park. He rents a large house with land which becomes the talk of the town in the nearby village. On listening to this, Mrs. Bennet becomes desperate to introduce her daughters to him. She wants one of her 5 daughters to marry him. The name of the daughters are Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty and Lydia. Alright, so remember that Elizabeth is the central character of this novel. Moving forward, now what happens is that Charles Bingley organizes a ball and Mrs. Bennet encourages her daughters to visit the ball. As Charles Bingley looks at Jane, he falls in love with her. Jane too gets mesmerized by him. At the party, we have friend of Bingley, that is Mr. Darcy. He finds no girl suitable for his caliber. He is rude to Elizabeth, who is sister of Jane, just I mentioned in the beginning of the novel. Elizabeth is also not less. She also shows Mr. Darcy her attitude and ignores him. On the other hand, we have Bingley and Jane who are talking to each other. Bingley invites Jane to visit the mansion that he has recently rented. They return to home and then Jane tells her mother Mrs. Bennet about the invitation of Bingley. On listening to this, Mrs. Bennet joyfully approves it. Now Jane gets ready to get to the house of Bingley, but what happens is that there comes a heavy rainfall and she gets soaked in the rain. Jane falls ill. She is made to stay at Bingley's mansion for longer days. After that, Elizabeth gets called to look after the health of Jane. So Elizabeth goes to Bingley's mansion. In the same mansion, he finds Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth has already ignored him in the party, or you can say in the ball. Now here once again they counter each other. But this time Darcy finds himself attracted to her wit and intelligence. Bingley's sister Caroline Bingley is also present there. She wants Darcy for herself, but now she is jealous of Elizabeth. We have a funny character in the novel named Mr. Collins. He is the cousin of Mr. Bennet. He is very rich and plans to marry one of Bennet's daughters. He proposes to Elizabeth, but Elizabeth offends him by rejecting the proposal. Later in the novel, Mr. Collins proposes Elizabeth's friend Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte Lucas wants to marry for security rather than love. She agrees and the two soon get married. So as the novel moves forward, we find that there is an entry of a new character named Wickham. Wickham is a handsome young soldier. He becomes a good friend with Elizabeth and tells her that Darcy cheated him out of the inheritance in the past. On listening to this, Elizabeth's prejudice and hatred against Darcy hardens. Elizabeth always found Darcy very arrogant. Now after listening to Wickham, she is confirmed. On the other hand, there comes the news that Bingley left for London without informing Jane. Bingley's sister writes a letter that they will never return. On listening to this, Jane is very heartbroken and she cannot believe how Bingley can do this to her. Elizabeth becomes determined that Darcy and Caroline are behind separating her sister from Bingley. The whole family is devastated after listening to this. And later in the novel, when Elizabeth visits the newly married Charlotte and Mr. Collins, she runs into Darcy. Darcy unexpectedly confesses his love for her and proposes her for marriage. Elizabeth rejects him right away. Darcy demands the reason behind getting rejected. Elizabeth tells him that he is arrogant, proud, and she also accuses him of separating Jane and Bingley and disinheriting Wickham. Darcy does not say anything to Elizabeth, but later he writes a letter to her. There he writes that her sister Jane is not expressive and they all thought that she is not serious about Bingley. That's the reason we sent Bingley to London, so that his feelings don't get hurt. He also reveals the true face of Wickham. He says that Wickham is a liar and has evil intentions. Wickham eloped with his younger sister Georgiana Darcy to gain her inheritance. Just for the sake of property or inheritance, he ran away with my younger sister. This whole truth shocks Elizabeth, and she starts realizing that she has been keeping a false opinion of Darcy. She feels very bad about her prejudices. And you see, from here the title of the novel comes, Pride and Prejudice, the prejudices of Elizabeth. Moreover, as the novel moves forward, there comes news that Lydia, one of Bennet's sisters, has eloped with Wickham. Mr. Bennet gets very anxious about it. He searches for Lydia but returns home empty-handed. The Bennet family start losing hope of locating her, but soon a letter comes from Mr. Gardiner, a friend of Mr. Bennet, which reads that the couple has been found and Wickham will marry her, but in return he wants his debts to be paid off. Later the news comes that all the debts of Wickham is paid off. The Bennet family assumed that Gardiner paid the amount to save them from disgrace. But later on, Elizabeth discovers that it is none other than Darcy who paid the debts of Wickham. Lydia and Wickham arrive, and despite all this, Mrs. Bennet gets relieved that at least one of her daughters is married now and she doesn't have to think about Lydia now. As the story moves forward, we find that Bingley returns into the novel and expresses his love for Jane. Soon after that, Elizabeth and Darcy go on walk. Here, Darcy once again proposes Elizabeth, and this time she happily accepts him. The novel ends with both Jane and Elizabeth getting married to their lovers. And with this, we come to the end of this video. I hope you found the video worth your time. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe the channel for more such updates. That's it for this video. Thank you.